When I first pulled my old Ford truck down the winding gravel road leading to the lake, the afternoon sun was sinking behind a curtain of tall pines. The air smelled of pine resin and water, clean, quiet, untouched. After years of city noise, endless traffic, and neighbors who argued through thin apartment walls, this place felt like the kind of peace I'd been chasing all my life. The cabin sat at the edge of a wide, blue lake, the kind of postcard-perfect view that made you forget what year it was. The reflection of the clouds on the water looked so real it was hard to tell where the sky ended and the lake began. I'd bought the property from an old man named Walter Jenkins, a retired marine biologist who'd owned it since the 1970s. Walter had told me, in his gruff but honest voice, that the land came with lake rights, meaning I technically owned part of the water and the shoreline on this side. I didn't think much of it at first. He said it casually, like someone mentioning that their house had a nice view. But he added something else that made me curious: you'll want to keep the paperwork safe. Folks around here have short memories and long grudges. The deal closed smoothly. I'd sold my small construction business back in Dallas, packed up my tools, my old dog Duke, and every memory I wanted to keep, then drove north to start over. I wasn't looking for trouble, I just wanted quiet mornings with coffee on the porch, evenings spent watching the sun drop behind the lake, and maybe a little fishing now and then. But peace, I learned, has a way of attracting storms. The first sign of trouble came not even 24 hours after I moved in. I'd barely unpacked half the boxes when I noticed a line of SUVs rolling down my driveway, big, shiny, city-looking vehicles that didn't belong on dirt roads. At first, I thought maybe it was a welcoming committee from the local neighborhood association. Small towns like this sometimes sent folks to greet newcomers. But when the doors opened, and a woman in a sharp navy suit stepped out, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon, I knew this wasn't a friendly visit. She introduced herself before I could even say hello. "I'm Mrs. Karen Dalton," she announced, her voice clipped and cold. "President of the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association." She said it like a badge of honor. Behind her, a handful of people, mostly middle-aged men and women in golf shirts, hovered, staring at my cabin like they'd just spotted a wild animal in their backyard. "Good afternoon," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Can I help you folks with something?" Karen didn't smile. "We've come to discuss the lake access situation," she said. "There seems to be some confusion about boundaries and ownership." "Boundaries?" I repeated, glancing toward the water. "Far as I know, my property line's marked clear down to the shoreline." She tightened her jaw. "Yes, well, that's exactly the issue. The HOA maintains and controls the docks and beach areas on this lake. Your property sits in an area that should fall under our jurisdiction. We'll need you to sign a standard membership agreement, pay your association dues, and acknowledge the common ownership of the lake." I blinked. "You're saying I need to pay you to live on my own land?" "It's not your land, mister," she checked her clipboard, "Mr. Hayes, correct? The lake and its access points are part of Lakeside Estates' shared community property. If you want to use the water, the docks, or maintain shoreline access, you'll need to comply with HOA regulations." Duke barked once from the porch, as if sensing her tone. I looked at her group, polished shoes, perfect hair, the faint smell of perfume and entitlement hanging in the air, and realized they'd come here expecting me to roll over and agree. They didn't know me. I crossed my arms. "Ma'am, I think you've got the wrong idea. I'm not part of your HOA. My property was never annexed into Lakeside Estates. The deed says my lake rights are private and recorded under county law. You can check it yourself." Karen gave a small, patronizing smile. "That's a common misunderstanding. Many older deeds contain outdated language. We've since expanded the association's authority around the entire lake perimeter. It's for environmental and community safety reasons." I laughed quietly. Community safety. Right. Behind her, one of the men, tall, bald, wearing mirrored sunglasses, stepped forward. You might want to cooperate, Mr. Hayes. We've had issues before with property owners trying to claim the shoreline. It never ends well. There it was, the veiled threat. I'd dealt with men like him before, the kind who used rules as weapons and intimidation as a tool. Well, I said slowly, lucky for me, I'm not the type to scare easy. They stood there a while longer, trying to press me into a corner with talk of regulations and community agreements, but I didn't budge. After 15 tense minutes, they finally left, but not before Karen warned, "You'll be hearing from us soon, Mr. Hayes. The HOA doesn't take kindly to non-compliance." When they drove off, dust hanging in the air, I felt the peace I'd found in that first morning vanish like smoke. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the moon ripple across the lake's surface, and thought about Walter's warning, short memories, long grudges. He wasn't kidding. The next few days, little things started happening. A "no trespassing, HOA property" sign appeared near my dock, hammered right into my shoreline. A few days later, someone chained off the narrow road leading to the public boat launch nearby. Then came the letters, thick envelopes stamped with "Lakeside Estates" in gold ink, demanding I attend a mandatory meeting about my non-compliant property. I ignored the first two. The third came hand-delivered by that same bald man, who waited outside his SUV until I took it. Inside was a formal notice of violation, accusing me of unauthorized use of shared resources, environmental disturbance, and obstruction of HOA jurisdiction. The words barely made sense, but I knew what they meant. They wanted control of the lake, and they thought they could bully me into surrendering it. That night, I went through my deed again. Every clause, every old survey note, every map Walter had given me. That's when I noticed something that made my pulse quicken. A series of hand-drawn boundary markers, labeled with letters and small circles, tracing a curved section of the shoreline, including not only my cabin but also the 3 docks that stretched out into the lake from the HOA's side. According to the official county record, those docks, the ones HOA members had built and used for years, sat squarely within my riparian rights zone. Meaning, legally speaking, they were sitting on my water. I leaned back in my chair, whistling low. So that's what Walter meant when he told me to keep the paperwork safe. He'd known the lake boundaries were tricky. And now, unknowingly, I held the one piece of leverage the HOA never saw coming. But I didn't plan to use it, not yet. I still believed this could end peacefully. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe once I showed them the records, we could work something out. After all, I wasn't the enemy here. I just wanted to live quietly. 2 days later, that illusion died for good. I came home from a supply run to find my mailbox smashed, tire tracks gouged into the soft mud by the road. The "private property" sign I'd hung near the dock had been torn down. And on my front door, someone had stapled another letter, this one less formal, handwritten in neat, angry strokes: "You can't stop the HOA. Sell now before things get difficult." I stood there on the porch, reading those words over and over while the wind rustled through the trees. Duke sat beside me, growling low. Trouble had come to my doorstep. And I knew then, the lake wasn't the only thing worth protecting. The morning after that letter showed up on my door, I woke early, the kind of early that comes from nerves, not rest. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the lake in streaks of orange and pink, but my stomach felt heavy. I made a pot of coffee and sat on the porch steps, Duke lying by my boots. The surface of the lake was smooth as glass, and for a moment, I tried to forget about the HOA, the threats, and the pettiness. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. People like Karen Dalton didn't back off when they thought they were right, or when they thought they could get away with it. That morning, I decided to make things official. I drove into town, a small place called Maple Ridge, with one diner, one gas station, and a courthouse that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. The county clerk's office was tucked behind the courthouse, run by a gray-haired woman named Martha who'd probably been there longer than most of the records themselves. When I explained who I was and why I'd come, she nodded slowly and pulled out a thick folder from a metal drawer that squeaked when it opened. "Ah, the Jenkins property," she said. "That one's been a point of interest for years." "Interest?" I asked, leaning over the counter. She chuckled. "That lake's been at the center of more disputes than I can count. Fishing rights, dock permits, easements, you name it. But your deed is clear as daylight, Mr. Hayes. You've got riparian rights extending 150 feet from your shoreline. That includes part of the water the HOA docks sit on. So legally, I said, they're on my property?" She nodded. "Technically, yes. They never should have built those docks without a shared use agreement with the Jenkins family. But after Walter got sick and stopped coming around, they just assumed ownership." "Assumed," I repeated. "That sounds about right." Martha looked up at me with a knowing expression. "Be careful, son. Those HOA folks got influence around here. Sheriff, zoning board, even the mayor, most of them live over there in Lakeside Estates. You push too hard, they'll push back twice as hard." I gave her a small smile. "That's fine. I've been pushed before." By the time I got home, my calm resolve had turned into quiet anger. They'd trespassed, vandalized, and tried to intimidate me, and all while sitting on my water. The irony made my blood boil. Still, I didn't want to fight. I wanted fairness. So I drafted a letter that afternoon, calm, factual, and backed by documents. I attached a copy of my deed, highlighted the boundary survey, and explained that I wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. I even included a polite offer: they could continue using the docks if they agreed to a simple shared use agreement acknowledging my ownership and waiving any false claims. I figured that was more than fair. I mailed it by hand the next morning. 3 days later, I got their answer, not in writing, but in bulldozers. When I came back from town that afternoon, I heard the sound before I saw it, the rumble of engines, the clatter of metal, and the unmistakable buzz of chainsaws. My heart sank. I parked the truck halfway down the driveway and sprinted the rest of the way, Duke barking beside me. There they were, 3 construction crews in orange vests, tearing through the small patch of trees near my dock. Branches lay everywhere, tire tracks dug into the soil, and one of the workers was hammering new wooden posts right along the waterline. At the center of it all stood Karen Dalton, clipboard in hand, barking orders like a general in battle. I stormed up to her. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She turned slowly, giving me that smug, polite smile again. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hayes. We're performing shoreline maintenance and stabilization per HOA environmental regulations. These trees were encroaching on the lake's recreational zone." I pointed at the mess. "That's my land you're cutting up." Her expression didn't change. "Incorrect. This area is designated as shared shoreline per Lakeside Estates master plan. The board approved it last month." "The board doesn't overrule the county," I said sharply. "You're trespassing. And damaging private property." Karen's eyes narrowed. "I'd advise you to calm down, Mr. Hayes. We're simply maintaining community assets. You're welcome to file a complaint if you think there's an error." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Lady, if your crew doesn't clear out of here in 5 minutes, I'll make sure every one of them is cited for destruction of property." That's when she made her mistake. She laughed, that same cruel, dismissive laugh that people use when they think they're untouchable. "You don't understand how things work here, Mr. Hayes. This isn't the city. Around this lake, the HOA decides what happens, not some outsider with a piece of paper." I didn't say a word. I pulled out my phone, started recording, and walked around filming everything: the bulldozers, the workers, the damage. Karen noticed immediately and snapped, "You can't record on HOA property." I kept filming. "Good thing this isn't HOA property." Her face went pale for a moment. Then she turned on her heel and barked, "Pack it up. We'll deal with this later." They left in a cloud of dust again, just like before, but this time, they'd left evidence behind. That night, I uploaded the video to the county's environmental reporting system, filed a property damage complaint with the sheriff's office, and sent copies to the State Department of Natural Resources. It wasn't about revenge. It was about standing my ground. 2 days later, the sheriff himself came out, Sheriff Dugan, a broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that had seen too many small-town dramas. He looked over the damage, took notes, and said carefully, "You're not wrong, Hayes. Technically, this land's yours. But off the record, you're poking a hornet's nest." "I'm just protecting what's mine," I said. He sighed. "Yeah. Well, that's how it starts. Just watch your back." When he left, I stood by the lake for a long time, watching the water shimmer in the fading light. The quiet that once soothed me now felt fragile, like something could shatter at any second. And I was right. That weekend, the HOA held their so-called mandatory meeting. I didn't go, but they came to me instead. Saturday morning, 3 SUVs rolled up again. Karen, the bald enforcer, and 2 others. This time, they didn't bother with politeness. They marched up to my porch like they owned it. "Mr. Hayes," Karen said, holding out a thick envelope. "You're being fined for repeated violations, including unauthorized shoreline development, obstruction of community access, and harassment of HOA personnel." I didn't even take it. "You're trespassing again." She smirked. "Not for long. The board has voted to file an injunction to restrict your lake access pending resolution. You'll be prohibited from using the docks or shoreline until further notice." I looked her dead in the eyes. "You do realize those docks sit on my lake rights, right?" That got a few murmurs from her crew. She ignored them. "You can argue semantics all you want. The board's decision is final." Something in me snapped then, not anger, but clarity. I'd tried reason. I'd offered peace. And they responded with arrogance, threats, and now legal games. So I decided to play my own. The next morning, I called a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but a man named Sam Carter, a property law specialist who'd once gone head-to-head with that same HOA years ago and won. When I explained my situation, he chuckled darkly. "Ah, the Dalton gang. They've been trying to control that lake for years. You're sitting on their weak spot." He came out the next day, reviewed my documents, took photos, and said the words I'd been waiting for: "They've got no legal ground here. In fact, those docks. You could have them shut down tomorrow." I raised an eyebrow. "Shut down?" "Sure. You control the riparian zone they're built on. If you file a formal notice of restriction, they'll be prohibited from using, maintaining, or expanding those structures without your permission." I smiled for the first time in days. "Let's do it." The paperwork went through faster than I expected. Within 72 hours, official notices were posted at every dock entrance around the lake. Notice of property use restriction under county riparian law: the structures located on parcels designated 14A, 14B, and 14C fall within the privately owned lake zone of property registered to Daniel Hayes. Unauthorized use or maintenance of said structures is prohibited without owner consent. By sunset, the HOA's phones must have been blowing up. Homeowners who'd paid thousands for private boat slips now found "No trespassing" signs hanging from their docks, legally backed, publicly posted, and completely outside Karen's control. I watched from my porch that evening as a handful of residents gathered across the lake, shouting and gesturing toward my property. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. The panic was written all over their faces. Karen had tried to take my lake. Now I controlled their docks. But as satisfying as that moment was, I knew it wasn't the end, not by a long shot. Because when powerful people lose control, they don't admit defeat. They retaliate. And the HOA was just getting started. I didn't have to wait long to see the fallout. The morning after the restriction notices went up, the entire neighborhood across the lake looked like an anthill someone had kicked over. SUVs were flying down their private roads, people were yelling, phones were out, and I could see Karen's tall figure pacing at the edge of their pier, waving her arms at a small crowd of angry homeowners. It was almost comical, all these people who'd spent years feeling untouchable suddenly realizing that their precious docks, the same ones they bragged about at every neighborhood barbecue, were sitting on someone else's property. By noon, my phone started ringing off the hook. Unknown numbers, blocked calls, messages demanding I remove the signs. I ignored them all. Instead, I sat on my porch, sipping my coffee, Duke at my feet, watching the chaos unfold across the water like a live theater performance. But I knew it wouldn't stay funny for long. People with power and pride don't take embarrassment lightly, especially not people like Karen Dalton. That afternoon, a black Mercedes pulled into my driveway, not the HOA's usual SUVs. A tall man in a dark suit stepped out, adjusting his tie. He looked like the kind of attorney who billed by the minute and smiled only when he smelled money. He introduced himself as Michael Grant, legal counsel for Lakeside Estates. "Mr. Hayes," he said, giving me a polite but firm nod. "I represent the Homeowners Association. I believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding property boundaries." "There's no misunderstanding," I said calmly. "I have the county records, the original deed, and a lawyer who's already confirmed it." He smiled, a slow, professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Carter, yes. I've spoken with him. He's enthusiastic." I said nothing. "Look," he continued, "the HOA isn't trying to pick a fight. But you have to understand, these docks serve dozens of residents. Shutting them down creates safety issues, liability risks, and community unrest. The board is willing to offer compensation for a shared use easement, say, $50,000. I leaned back against the porch post. $50,000. For trespassing on my property for years? He shrugged. "It's a good faith offer. Refuse it, and we'll have to pursue legal remedies." "Legal remedies," I repeated with a smirk. "You mean the kind where you drag me through court hoping I'll get tired and sell?" He didn't answer. Just handed me his card. "You'll hear from us soon, Mr. Hayes." When he left, I stood there for a long time, card in hand, thinking. I'd seen this tactic before, not with lakes or HOAs, but in construction. Big developers used it all the time: pressure, paperwork, intimidation. They'd drown you in legal fees until you either gave up or went broke. It wasn't about who was right, it was about who could last longer. So I decided to prepare. I spent the next week reinforcing everything I owned. New motion lights. Security cameras around the cabin and dock. I even installed a small generator backup, just in case someone thought cutting my power would send a message. Duke followed me everywhere, his ears always perked, sensing the tension. Sam, my lawyer, called a few days later. "They're filing for an injunction," he said. "Claiming your restriction notices interfere with community infrastructure." I laughed. "Infrastructure? It's a few planks of wood on my water." "Yeah, but they'll twist it however they can," Sam replied. "Don't worry, though, we'll counter with your ownership documents. I'll also file a motion for trespass and damages. Let's make this expensive for them." That's exactly what we did. Within a week, my counterclaim was on record. The HOA was officially facing a lawsuit, one that listed damages for illegal construction, property destruction, and unauthorized use of private resources. The number wasn't huge by corporate standards, but for a suburban HOA, it was a wake-up call: $250,000. That hit them where it hurt, their wallets. Karen's tone changed fast after that. She stopped showing up personally, but her people didn't. Late at night, I'd hear vehicles slowing near my driveway, then speeding off. Someone dumped garbage bags by my mailbox. My dock ropes were cut twice. And one morning, I found spray paint on my fence, sell and leave. Duke growled when he saw it. I just stood there, cold fury settling in my chest. It wasn't about property anymore. It was about control, and they couldn't stand the idea that one man, alone, had outsmarted them. The next escalation came at dawn 3 days later. I woke up to the sound of a motorboat, an unusual noise that early. I looked out the window and saw 3 men in an aluminum fishing boat near my dock, wearing vests marked HOA maintenance. They were pulling up my buoys, the ones marking my boundary. I stormed out onto the deck and yelled, "Hey! You're trespassing. Get off my water." One of them shouted back, "Karen said this is HOA property. Stay inside, sir." Before I could grab my phone, Duke bolted down the steps, barking like a thunderstorm. The men panicked, dropped one of the buoys, and sped off. I recorded the whole thing, then sent it to Sam. He called an hour later, half laughing, half serious. "You've got them dead to rights, Hayes. They're digging their own grave. I'm adding this footage to the complaint." The more they pushed, the more they buried themselves. Every violation, every trespass, every threat, all documented. Then came the day I realized just how deep this war went. I was out in town, picking up lumber for some repairs, when I overheard 2 men at the diner talking about me. They didn't see me sitting behind them. "Yeah, that new guy by the lake, the one fighting with the HOA," one said. "He's messing with the wrong people. Karen's husband's on the zoning board. Word is, they're trying to get his property declared non-compliant." Non-compliant how? Something about septic runoff or shoreline erosion. They'll find something. That night, I barely slept. I'd seen this trick before too. When you couldn't beat someone in court, you weaponized bureaucracy. If they could get my property labeled unsafe or environmentally non-compliant, the county could issue a shutdown order, maybe even seize access. I needed insurance, not the kind you buy, but the kind you build. So I spent the next few days digging deeper into the HOA's records. Through county archives, I found the permits for their docks. Half of them were expired. Some didn't exist at all. Others had been filed under names that didn't match the current board members. It was a gold mine. Sam helped me organize it into a formal complaint to the State Environmental Office, anonymous, at first. Within a week, inspectors showed up at Lakeside Estates. They examined every dock, every drain pipe, every boat lift. By the end of the inspection, the HOA had been cited for multiple violations, unpermitted structures, environmental damage, and failure to comply with waterway management laws. The news spread like wildfire. Homeowners were furious, not at me, but at Karen. Their own president had led them into a mess that could cost thousands in fines and repairs. I heard yelling echoing across the lake that evening, voices raised, accusations thrown. The HOA was cracking from the inside. But I knew Karen wouldn't go quietly. That night, my power went out. Total darkness. I checked the breakers, fine. The lines, fine. I started the generator, got the lights back on, and found Duke pacing by the door, growling. I stepped outside and saw fresh tire tracks by the pole near the road. Someone had tampered with my transformer. That was the line. I called the sheriff. This time, I didn't ask for a warning. I filed a formal police report for criminal damage, trespass, and harassment. And I gave them every video, every photo, every message I had. Sheriff Dugan looked tired when he came out. "You're making waves, Hayes. Folks in town are talking. But between you and me, you're in the right. Keep your cameras rolling and your doors locked." I thanked him, though I could see the pressure he was under too. The HOA's influence reached far, but the law, the real law, was starting to catch up to them. A week later, the hearing date came through. County Court, small room, one judge. I walked in wearing my cleanest flannel, boots polished enough to pass for formal. Karen sat across the room, in her perfect navy suit, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Her lawyer whispered in her ear, papers spread across the table. When the judge called the case, I expected a long battle. Instead, it took less than an hour. Sam presented the deed, the maps, the video evidence, and the violation reports. The HOA's lawyer tried to argue community integration and shared historical use, but the judge wasn't buying it. Finally, the judge looked up and said, "The property line and water rights are clear. The HOA has no authority over Mr. Hayes' land or adjacent waters. Any further interference will constitute criminal trespass." Karen's face turned white. Then the judge added, "Furthermore, the docks located within Mr. Hayes' riparian boundary are unauthorized structures. They must be removed or relocated within 60 days. The room went silent. Even Sam blinked in surprise. It was over. I'd won. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the air felt lighter. For the first time since I'd moved in, the lake felt like mine again, not just by law, but in peace. Or so I thought. Because people like Karen don't just lose. They plot. They wait. And they strike when you least expect it. And in the weeks that followed, I learned the hard way, victory on paper doesn't always mean safety on the ground. For a few short weeks after the court ruling, I actually believed it was over. The sun rose and set over the lake without incident. No SUVs on my driveway. No letters. No more spray paint, no mysterious power outages, no late-night engines idling at the road. Just quiet, the kind of peace I'd imagined when I first bought the place. The lake, with its mirror surface and morning mist, finally felt like home again. But peace around here didn't last. Not with people like Karen Dalton nearby. The first sign came subtle, a feeling more than a fact. I'd walk into town and people would stop talking when I passed. The cashier at the hardware store, who used to chat about fishing, barely made eye contact anymore. The diner waitress started serving me with a polite stiffness that hadn't been there before. Even Martha at the clerk's office seemed uneasy when I dropped by. One afternoon, I overheard two men outside the gas station talking about that guy who stole the docks. Another time, a kid on a bike yelled, "Lake thief," as he rode past my driveway. That's when I realized Karen had changed tactics. She couldn't win legally, so she was turning public opinion against me. Rumors spread faster than wildfire in small towns. Within a week, I'd gone from the quiet newcomer to the villain, the greedy outsider who'd taken the lake from the community. I could almost hear Karen's voice behind the story, spinning lies in her perfect diction, painting me as the selfish man who ruined everyone's summer. At first, I ignored it. Gossip couldn't touch the law. But when the vandalism started again, I knew things were escalating. It began with a rock, a fist-sized one that shattered the side window of my truck one night. Then, my mailbox disappeared completely, post and all. The third time, someone dumped dead fish on my porch. The smell lingered for days, no matter how much I scrubbed. I filed another report with the sheriff. Dugan came out, wrote it up, but I could tell he was frustrated. "I know who's behind it," he muttered, "but unless I catch them in the act, my hands are tied." "I get it," I said, though inside, I was boiling. "Just keep the record going. I'll handle the rest." And I did. I upgraded every camera on my property. Solar-powered motion sensors by the gate, floodlights on timers, cameras with night vision aimed at every angle. I even put one out by the shoreline, hidden in a fake birdhouse. If anyone came near my property again, I'd know. For a few nights, it stayed quiet, until the storm hit. It was a Saturday night, one of those thick, humid evenings where the air feels heavy before the rain breaks. The sky rumbled for hours before the first lightning bolt split the dark. I sat by the window with Duke, sipping coffee, watching the reflections on the water when a flash caught my eye, not lightning, but headlights. A vehicle was parked by the far end of my drive, engine off, lights flickering once before going dark. I stood slowly, heart pounding. Duke growled low. Then, movement. 3 figures got out, dark raincoats, flashlights, moving fast toward the dock. I grabbed my flashlight and my phone, flipped on the recording, and stepped outside. Rain was starting to fall, wind cutting through the trees. "Hey!" I shouted over the storm. "You're on private property." They froze. One of them turned, and in the brief flash of lightning, I recognized him, the bald enforcer from Karen's crew. He muttered something to the others, and they started hauling something heavy toward the dock. Tools, maybe. "Not tonight," I said under my breath. I started down the slope toward the lake, Duke beside me, barking now. When I got close enough, I saw what they were doing. They were cutting the posts of my dock, trying to sabotage it. One of them swung a hammer into the supports while another held a chainsaw. I didn't think. I charged forward, shouting over the thunder. "Drop it. Now." The chainsaw stopped. The man with it turned, startled. "This is HOA property," he yelled back, his voice nearly drowned out by the rain. "You think a storm's gonna hide your crimes?" I shot back. "You're trespassing and destroying evidence under an active court order." He hesitated, then made the mistake of stepping forward. Duke lunged, barking so loud it echoed off the water. The man stumbled back, slipped on the wet boards, and went down hard. The other 2 scrambled for the boat, shouting. I kept my flashlight trained on them, filming everything. "Get off my lake. Now." They sped off into the darkness, engine roaring, leaving the dock half-collapsed and one of their tools floating in the shallows, a bolt cutter with HOA maintenance engraved on the handle. By morning, I'd turned over the footage to the sheriff. This time, the evidence was undeniable. Dugan called me that afternoon. "You weren't kidding," he said. "We identified one of them, a guy named Mark Jensen, HOA groundskeeper. He's already been brought in for questioning." I nodded, staring out at the ruined dock. "They won't stop, Sheriff. You know that, right?" He sighed. "No, they won't. But keep that footage handy. You just handed them a felony." The arrest hit the town like a bomb. Karen tried to distance herself, claiming the men had acted independently, but no one bought it. The HOA's reputation started to crumble. Homeowners were furious again, not just about the docks, but now about criminal charges, fines, and lost property value. Still, Karen didn't quit. She doubled down. She filed appeals, injunctions, and even sent letters to the county zoning board accusing me of environmental interference. But each time, the evidence shut her down. Then came the letter that changed everything. It arrived on a Wednesday morning, plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence: "You don't belong here, Hayes. Leave before you end up at the bottom of your own lake." For a few seconds, I just stared at it. Then I folded it carefully, slid it into a plastic bag, and called the sheriff again. When Dugan showed up, he looked grim. "This isn't just harassment anymore. This is a threat. I'm escalating this." He took the letter for fingerprinting, but deep down, I knew they'd never find anything. People like Karen didn't get their hands dirty. They sent others to do it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind against the windows put me on edge. Duke stayed by the door, ears perked, growling softly now and then. I left the lights on and kept my shotgun by the wall, just in case. At dawn, the rain stopped. The lake was still, eerily calm. I went outside and found muddy footprints leading down from the road, stopping halfway to the dock. Whoever had left them turned back before reaching the water. Watching. Waiting. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to wait for them to strike again. I drove into town that morning and filed for a restraining order against the HOA board, specifically naming Karen and her enforcer. Sam handled the paperwork and even got the local paper to publish a short notice about the ongoing case. I wanted the whole town to see what was really happening. Then I made my next move, one that Karen never saw coming. See, during all the chaos, I'd been quietly recording not just the trespasses, but the HOA's finances too. Public records showed they'd been collecting lake maintenance fees for years, thousands of dollars from residents, but none of that money ever went to real maintenance. In fact, the reports didn't line up. Funds were missing, transfers unaccounted for. I passed the documents to Sam, who forwarded them to the state auditor. Within 2 weeks, the HOA was under financial investigation. And just like that, the fortress Karen built began to crack wide open. By midsummer, she'd lost her position as HOA president. Several board members resigned. The docks, already damaged and half abandoned, were dismantled entirely by county order. The homeowners, once angry at me, now turned their fury on her. The whispers in town flipped. That guy by the lake became the one who exposed them. Still, I didn't celebrate. I'd seen how quiet could turn deadly. I kept my cameras up, my lights on, my guard high. And then, one evening, about a month later, she showed up. I was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, when a silver sedan pulled slowly into the drive. Karen stepped out, alone this time, no clipboard, no entourage. Her perfect hair was windblown, her expression hollow. "Mr. Hayes," she said quietly, walking toward me. "May I speak with you?" I didn't answer right away. Duke growled low. I finally nodded once. "You've got 2 minutes." She stopped at the bottom step, hands trembling slightly. "I didn't know it would go this far," she said. "I never wanted anyone hurt. I thought we were protecting the lake. The community." I stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or curse. "You tried to steal what wasn't yours. You harassed me, vandalized my property, and sent people to threaten my life." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't understand, they pressured me. The board. My husband. I cut her off. You had a choice. Every step of the way." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she turned to leave, her voice barely audible over the crickets. "They won't stop, you know. Even without me. That lake's worth millions. Someone else will come for it." I watched her drive away until the taillights disappeared into the dark. And for the first time, I realized she might be right. The war with the HOA was ending, but something bigger, something quieter, was waiting just beyond the tree line. Something about the lake, its land, its value, its ownership, ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. And before the summer was over, I'd find out just how deep. After that night Karen drove away, I didn't see her again. Word around town was that she'd sold her house quietly and left for the city. Some said she couldn't take the shame, others said she was afraid. I didn't really care which one was true. For me, it meant peace, or at least the kind I hadn't had since the day I moved in. For the first time in months, I started to rebuild. I repaired the dock, repainted the cabin, replaced the shattered truck window. I even added a small boat ramp near the shore. Duke would sit beside me each morning as mist rose from the water, and for a while, it felt like the nightmare was finally fading. But that peace, it didn't last. Not because of the HOA this time, they were broken, disbanded, legally neutered, but because of what I found when the county surveyors came. It started when the new county commissioner, a straight-talking woman named Rebecca Lane, called me up. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "since the HOA properties are being re-evaluated, we're reviewing all waterway boundaries in the district. Your lake's on the list. Mind if we take a look?" "Go ahead," I said, thinking nothing of it. 3 men and a woman showed up 2 days later with scanners, drones, and measuring equipment. They took samples, measurements, photos, the whole bit. I made coffee for them and watched from the porch. But then one of the techs, a young guy named Alan, came up the hill, frowning at his tablet. "Hey, Mr. Hayes," he said, "you ever notice anything off about this lake?" I raised an eyebrow. "Off how?" He turned the screen toward me. The drone's topographical scan showed the lake bed, and something buried under it. A massive, rectangular shape, maybe 40 feet long, right beneath the deepest part. "That shouldn't be there," he said. "Looks man-made." A chill ran through me. "You sure that's not just rock?" He shook his head. "Nope. It's metal." That night, long after they'd packed up and left, I sat on the porch staring out over the dark water. Metal under the lake. Something big. Something no one had mentioned in any deed, record, or survey. I hardly slept. The next morning, I called Sam. He came over with his usual calm, carrying a thermos and a thick folder. "You're telling me there's something buried in your lake," he said, setting the thermos down. "That's what the scans show," I said. "Right below the old dock line. Could be an old barge, a tank, maybe even a plane. I don't know." Sam rubbed his chin. "Could explain why the HOA was so desperate to control this place. Maybe they knew." "Knew what?" He looked at me. "That whatever's down there isn't just scrap metal. We decided to dig deeper, not literally yet, but through records." Sam pulled county archives, property maps dating back to the 1940s, even military records. And that's when the story took a strange turn. Back in the late 1950s, before this neighborhood existed, the land around the lake was part of a government testing site, specifically, a defense contractor called Linver Aerospace. They'd built prototypes here during the Cold War, testing small amphibious drones and surveillance systems. When the project ended, the company went bankrupt, and the property was auctioned off. Decades later, developers bought it, drained part of the marsh, and built the homes that became the HOA. Only one section was never transferred, the lake itself. It was sealed under a quiet federal easement, later sold to private hands when the company dissolved. And that chain of ownership ended with me. Sam sat back in his chair, whistling low. "So that's why you technically own their docks. You didn't just buy a lake, you bought a piece of Cold War history." It was surreal. I'd come here looking for solitude, and instead, I'd stepped into the remnants of a forgotten government project. A few days later, Rebecca Lane called again. "Mr. Hayes, about that object under your lake, I've got some news." She explained that after reviewing the data, the county had informed a federal agency, something called the Environmental Asset Recovery Division, and they wanted to inspect the site. I didn't like the sound of that. "Inspect? You mean take over?" "They claim it's for safety reasons," she said. "If it's a military relic, it could contain hazardous materials. But don't worry, your ownership rights are intact for now." For now. Those 2 words stuck in my mind. The next week, 2 black SUVs rolled up my driveway. 4 men in plain suits stepped out, flashing credentials so fast I barely caught the agency name. They spoke in careful, measured tones, asking access to the shoreline and requesting I refrain from independent excavation. I agreed, but not before making one thing clear. "You don't touch my property without a warrant." They nodded politely, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. That night, I saw their lights out on the lake. They'd launched a small remote submersible, scanning the bottom again. The hum of its motor echoed across the water until after midnight. By morning, they were gone, no explanation, no report, just tire tracks in the mud. 3 days later, Rebecca called again. "You might want to sit down for this," she said. "Whatever's under your lake, it's classified." The federal database lists it as an unrecovered test article. They're not giving me details, but they're interested. Very interested. I stared out the window, watching rain ripple across the surface. So now it's the government that wants my lake. Looks that way, she said quietly. I hung up and walked outside. Duke followed, tail low, sensing my tension. The wind was picking up again, and the air felt heavy, like that night months ago when the HOA thugs came. I looked at the water, calm and reflective, and for a moment, I swore I saw something glint beneath the surface. That night, I dreamed of the lake, black water, flashing lights beneath it, and a voice whispering, "You don't belong here." When I woke up, I made my decision. If they were coming for my lake, they'd have to do it in daylight, in public, where everyone could see. I called Sam again. "Get me a drone." He laughed at first, but when he saw my face, he stopped. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." 2 hours later, we launched a small drone over the water, scanning the coordinates from the county's files. The feed came through sharp and clear, the outline of the lake bed, and there it was, a huge metallic rectangle, covered in sediment, about 15 feet below the surface. Sam zoomed in. "That's not just metal. Look, see that shape? Looks like a hatch." I leaned closer. It was faint, but unmistakable, a rectangular panel, like a door. "What the hell is that?" I muttered. Before he could answer, the drone feed cut to black. "Connection lost," Sam said. We tried again, but the drone wouldn't reconnect. The signal was being jammed. I looked up just in time to see 2 black SUVs parked on the opposite shore, the same ones from before. "They're watching," Sam said quietly. "They're warning," I corrected. That was the moment I realized the HOA was just the beginning. Karen, the board, the vandalism, all of it was noise to distract from something bigger, something they didn't want anyone to uncover. By the following morning, official-looking signs appeared around the lake: "Federal property, do not enter." Sam called it temporary jurisdiction. I called it theft. They fenced off half the shoreline, including the section where the HOA docks used to be. Technically, they couldn't touch my cabin or land without a court order, but it didn't matter. The peace I'd fought for was gone again, this time under the weight of secrecy. Weeks passed. Reporters showed up. The town buzzed with theories: crashed plane, chemical dump, alien craft. People stopped calling me the lake thief. Now they called me the man with the secret. Then, one night, everything changed again. I woke to the sound of helicopters, low, steady, circling overhead. Bright searchlights cut through the fog. I ran outside just in time to see a massive barge anchored on the water, floodlights blasting across the surface. They were lifting something. Through the glare, I could see a crane hauling a massive, corroded object from the depths, covered in weeds and mud, dripping as it rose. It wasn't a plane or a boat. It was a sealed steel container the size of a truck, marked faintly with faded lettering, "Linver Defense, property of U.S. government." My heart pounded as I filmed from the shore. The men on the barge worked fast, shouting orders. They loaded the container, secured it, and within minutes, it was gone, covered and hauled away before dawn. By sunrise, there was no trace left, no lights, no signs, just ripples fading on the water. Later that morning, Rebecca called. Her voice was tight. "They took it," she said. "Whatever it was, it's gone. They've sealed the records." "Do they know what it was?" I asked. "Officially? No. Unofficially, let's just say it wasn't supposed to be found." For a long time, I didn't speak. I just looked out at the lake, now calm and silent again. Rebecca hesitated. "You okay, Hayes?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah. Just wondering how many ghosts this lake is hiding." When she hung up, I stood there for a while, listening to the wind in the trees. Duke sat beside me, tail thumping once, then going still. I rebuilt the dock again that summer, slower this time. The county eventually lifted the federal signs, and the lake was declared safe. But I knew better. I could feel it, that sense of something deeper beneath the calm, something watching. As for the old HOA land, it stayed quiet. The homes were still there, but the board never reformed. Some owners sold and left, others stayed but avoided me. The lake became a kind of unspoken border, a reminder of everything that had happened. And me? I stayed. I fixed the cabin, took up fishing again, learned to enjoy the silence. But sometimes, when the moonlight hits the water just right, I still see a faint shimmer, a ripple that moves against the wind. Maybe it's just the current. Maybe it's nothing. But every time it happens, I remember Karen's last words, "They won't stop." And I can't help but wonder if she was right, that what's buried beneath this lake isn't done with us yet. So I sit on the porch, night after night, watching the water, coffee in hand, Duke asleep at my feet, waiting for the next ripple, the next knock at the door, the next storm. Because out here, peace doesn't last. It never does.